In all my years walking this winding path of life, observing the world and the people within it, I've come to understand something essential. Wisdom is not just knowledge amassed, but knowledge applied. It's found not in how much we know, but in how we live. It's reflected in the way we treat others, in how we respond to hardship, and most of all, in how we grow from the experiences that shape us. Here's an uncomfortable truth. There are patterns, clear, consistent behaviors that don't necessarily reflect a lack of intelligence, but rather a lack of wisdom. Today, I want to share 6 of these signs, not to judge or label anyone, but to hold up a mirror for honest self-reflection. This isn't about blame. It's about becoming aware of the subtle traps we all risk falling into and reclaiming the inner strength to rise above them. Recognizing these traits isn't just helpful, it's transformative, because once we become aware of the habits that quietly hold us back, we begin the real journey of change. These signs are often ignored, dismissed, or even normalized in modern culture, but Stoicism, in its enduring wisdom, calls us to look deeper, to see beyond the surface, and confront the patterns that numb our minds and close our hearts. So consider this not a lecture, but an invitation to pause, reflect, and perhaps, if needed, redirect your path. Together, let's explore these 6 clear behaviors that often reveal a foolish mind, and along the way, uncover the timeless lessons that Stoic wisdom offers to elevate our lives with clarity, integrity, and growth. Are you ready to begin? Let's dive in. 1. Constantly blaming. Tentasso. There's a quiet habit that eats away at a person's potential without them even noticing. It doesn't shout, it doesn't break things, it doesn't erupt like anger or drag you down like depression. No, it's far more subtle than that. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. It's the habit of blaming others. You see, life is filled with uncertainty. Things go wrong, people disappoint us, plans collapse. Sometimes it's our fault, sometimes it isn't. But the way we respond to those moments defines who we are, far more than the circumstances themselves. And for the fool, the unwise, the emotionally immature, there is only one response: deflect. They blame their parents for their emotional baggage. They blame society for their lack of opportunity. They blame their boss, their partner, their friends, the government, even the weather. Their default setting is, it's not my fault. And maybe it isn't, not entirely. But here's the hard truth the Stoics understood. Even when we are not the cause, we are still responsible for what happens next. Responsibility is not about fault, it's about power. The one who always blames others is by definition powerless, because when you hand over responsibility, you hand over control. You become a victim, not of circumstance, but of your own mindset. This is why Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. In other words, the wise man doesn't waste time assigning blame. He asks, what can I do now? The fool, on the other hand, is addicted to the comfort of innocence. Blaming others feels good for a moment. It absolves us, it shields us from guilt, but it also shields us from growth. If every setback is someone else's fault, then you never have to change, you never have to improve, you never have to take that painful, honest look in the mirror. And so you stay stuck emotionally, professionally, spiritually, while convincing yourself that you're right and the world is wrong. But let's be honest, we've all been there. We've all had moments when we wanted to point fingers. Sometimes we do. It's a deeply human impulse to protect our ego from discomfort. The question isn't whether we fall into this trap. The question is whether we stay there. There is power in owning your role, even when it's small, even when it's not fair. Because the moment you take responsibility is the moment you unlock the ability to change. You reclaim authorship of your own story. And the truth is, blame destroys relationships. It erodes trust. It creates distance. Think about the people you admire, the leaders, the mentors, the ones who carry themselves with quiet strength. They don't waste time blaming others, they own their failures. And because of that, they lead with clarity, with integrity, with grace. Let me tell you a story. A man named Mark was managing a critical project in a fast-paced startup. The project failed, deadlines missed, the client disappointed, the team deflated, and Mark had every excuse lined up. Marketing fumbled the messaging, sales didn't deliver, the client's expectations were unrealistic. It wasn't his fault. But something in him paused, and instead of defending himself, he asked the simplest and most difficult question a leader can ask. What part did I play in this? And then he said it out loud. I didn't communicate clearly. I didn't anticipate the bottlenecks. I could have stepped in earlier. Silence, then respect. His team listened, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. He set the tone, and in doing so he changed the culture. What could have been a cycle of blame became a moment of trust. What could have fractured the team became the foundation of something stronger. That's what responsibility does. Now let me ask you, where in your life are you still pointing fingers? Where are you waiting for others to change before you do? What part of your life have you silently labeled, "not my fault," and left untouched? Stoicism demands more of us. It teaches that wisdom begins with ownership, that we must first rule ourselves before we can navigate the world with clarity and purpose. Blame is easy, growth is hard, but only one leads to freedom. So if you want to live with strength, real strength, stop waiting for others to fix what's broken. Stop rehearsing your excuses. Take responsibility even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because the moment you choose ownership, you cease to be a victim of fate. You become a student of life. And in that moment, you become wise. 2. A closed mind. There is no greater prison than a mind unwilling to open. A closed mind may not look like a cage from the outside. It often hides behind confidence, behind bold opinions, behind the illusion of certainty. But within, it is rigid, fragile, afraid. Over time, people build mental fortresses, brick by brick, each one shaped by fear, by pride, by the stubborn refusal to question what they believe. They become guardians of their own limitations, shielding themselves from ideas that threaten the comfort of familiarity. And while they may appear strong, unshakable even, the truth is they have stopped growing. They have chosen safety over transformation. A person with a closed mind cannot evolve because they've already decided they are right. They cannot connect because they do not listen. They cannot lead because they refuse to learn. They drift through life defending what they think they know, unaware that life itself is a constant invitation to change, to stretch, to see with new eyes. The Stoics understood this long ago. Epictetus reminded us that we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, to listen more than we speak. And what is listening but an act of humility, a choice to say, I may not have all the answers, there might be another way, there might be something I haven't seen. When your mind is open, you become a student of life. You observe rather than react. You welcome discomfort as a sign that growth is near. You understand that being wrong is not a failure, it is a gift, because every time you shed an outdated belief, you create room for something greater. But when you close your mind, you choose stagnation. You choose to remain locked in a version of yourself that may no longer serve you. And that choice, whether conscious or not, has consequences. You limit your relationships because you can't truly engage with perspectives different from your own. You limit your future because you're too anchored to the past. And worst of all, you limit your capacity to become wise because wisdom requires openness, curiosity, and courage. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And what could be more wasteful than clinging to beliefs that no longer move us forward, than rejecting new insight simply because it challenges us? Ask yourself, are you still defending ideas you adopted long ago, not because they are true, but because they are familiar? Are you avoiding change because it makes you uncomfortable, or because it truly threatens your values? The mind is like a garden. If it's closed off, the soil goes dry, and nothing new can grow. But when it is open, when it is exposed to light, to water, to fresh ideas, it flourishes. And so do you. To live wisely in this world, especially today, you must let go of the need to always be right. You must trade stubbornness for self-inquiry, arrogance for awareness. That's not weakness, that is strength. That is Stoicism in motion. An open mind does not mean believing everything. It means testing, questioning, listening, learning. It means choosing to evolve rather than to retreat. And it is in that choice again and again that wisdom is born. 3. Lack of empathy. One of the clearest signs of a foolish heart is its inability to feel what others feel. Empathy is not a soft virtue. It is not weakness, nor is it merely a kind gesture to be performed when convenient. Empathy is wisdom in motion. It is strength expressed as understanding. And when it is absent, what remains is a hollow shell of connection, conversation without depth, relationships without trust, and a self that is cut off from the rest of humanity. To lack empathy is not simply to misunderstand others, it is to misunderstand life. You see, we were not made to live isolated in our own perspective. We are born into a world filled with other people, each carrying their own pain, joy, history, and struggle. To walk through this life unaware of that, or worse, indifferent to it, is to move like a blind man through a garden, trampling the beauty underfoot and wondering why everything feels so lifeless. The fool who lacks empathy does not know they are disconnected. They mistake indifference for clarity. They confuse apathy with control. They think that emotions are distractions, that vulnerability is weakness, that to feel for another is to lose oneself. But in truth, it is the exact opposite. To feel for others is to expand beyond the prison of self. To understand someone else's suffering is not to be burdened, it is to become fully human. Stoic philosophy is often misunderstood in this regard. Some mistake it for coldness, for a rejection of emotion. But the Stoics never taught us to be unfeeling. They taught us to be in control of our emotions, to direct them with wisdom, not to suppress them into silence. And empathy, rightly understood, is one of the most powerful tools for that control. Because when you see the pain behind someone's anger, the fear behind their resistance, or the loneliness behind their cruelty, you no longer react with rage or judgment. You respond with insight, with balance, with grace. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And what quality could be higher than thoughts rooted in compassion? When you lack empathy, you reduce people to obstacles or objects. You interpret the world only through your needs, your wants, your expectations. And inevitably this leads to isolation. People may still be around you, but they won't feel seen, they won't feel safe, and slowly they will pull away. Empathy builds bridges where pride would build walls. It opens conversations, it heals misunderstandings, it softens conflict and deepens trust. Without it, relationships become transactional, mechanical at best, manipulative at worst. But with it, we are able to truly connect. We can look into another person's eyes and say, "I may not have lived your story, but I am willing to understand it. I see you, I hear you, and I care." This is not just sentiment, it is strategy. In leadership, empathy is what earns loyalty. In friendship, it is what creates safety. In love, it is what makes intimacy real. Now pause. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly listened to someone, not to respond, not to win, not to correct, but to understand? When was the last time you entered a conversation curious about what it feels like to be them? If the answer is difficult to find, don't be ashamed. Awareness is not condemnation, it is the beginning of change. Because empathy can be practiced. It begins with presence, with silence, with the willingness to pause your inner dialogue long enough to truly take in another person's reality. It grows with questions, with curiosity, with humility. It grows every time you resist the urge to judge and choose instead to ask, what must this feel like for them? And in time, it becomes a habit, a way of moving through the world that draws people in rather than pushing them away. The Stoic life is not a cold life. It is a courageous one. And few things require more courage than the vulnerability of empathy, to open your heart without losing your strength, to sit with another's pain without being consumed by it, to carry compassion into a world that too often rewards detachment. But that is what the wise do, because the fool seeks power in control, while the wise find it in connection. So choose empathy not as a feeling, but as a way of life, because when you truly understand others, you don't just become more compassionate, you become more whole. And in that wholeness, wisdom takes root. 4. Arrogance. There is a kind of ignorance that hides itself, not in silence, but in noise. It doesn't come from not knowing, but from the belief that you already know everything. That form of ignorance has a name. It's called arrogance. At first glance, arrogance can look like confidence. It carries itself with posture, speaks with authority, and insists with conviction. But look a little closer, and you'll see something else. Fear, insecurity, the desperate need to be seen as right even when the evidence says otherwise. The arrogant person lives behind a wall, a fortress built from the illusion of superiority. They speak over others, not with the intent to connect, but to dominate. They interrupt, not because they're curious, but because they cannot bear the discomfort of being questioned. They dismiss ideas that aren't their own. They surround themselves with echoes and isolate themselves from truth. And yet they are blind to this, because arrogance is self-reinforcing. It feeds on compliments, rejects critique, and distorts reality until the person trapped inside truly believes they are always the smartest one in the room. But here's what the Stoics knew. True wisdom doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't impose. It listens. It observes. It asks questions. Because the wise man knows that the more he learns, the more he sees how much he does not know. Arrogance, then, is not a sign of strength. It is a symptom of fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of appearing weak, fear of not being enough. And in that fear, the arrogant person chooses a mask over growth. Think about it. How many people do you know who cannot admit a mistake, who cling to their opinions even when they're proven false, who would rather lose a friendship than concede a point? Now ask yourself, have you ever been that person? The truth is, we all have. Arrogance isn't a personality flaw reserved for a few. It's a temptation that visits all of us, especially when we've worked hard, achieved success, or been praised for our intelligence. It creeps in when we start believing our own hype, when we stop listening, when we confuse certainty with truth. But Stoicism cuts through the noise with ruthless clarity. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled the Roman Empire, wrote to himself constantly, not to boast, but to remind himself how small he was in the face of the universe. He urged himself to stay humble, to remain a student, to never let power or praise cloud his judgment. Because arrogance is not only a threat to your character, it is a threat to your growth. When you're arrogant, you stop learning, you stop connecting, you shut the door to improvement, and then wonder why your world feels smaller. Worse still, arrogance fractures relationships. No one wants to speak openly with someone who always needs to be right. No one trusts a person who cannot admit fault. The arrogant may win arguments, but they lose connection. They silence others, and in that silence, they become deaf to anything that could help them grow. Contrast that with humility. Humility does not mean weakness. It does not mean playing small or pretending to know nothing. It means being strong enough to say, I don't know everything, and I'm okay with that. It means creating space for others to speak and truly listening. It means being open to correction, to new ideas, to change. Think of the best leaders, the wisest friends, the mentors you admire. Are they the loudest in the room? Or are they the ones who ask questions, who listen more than they speak, who own their mistakes with grace? Now think of yourself. When was the last time you said the words, I was wrong? Or, tell me more, I want to understand. These are the phrases of the wise, the habits of the humble. The Stoic path is not about pretending to be perfect. It's about confronting your imperfections with honesty and choosing growth over pride. It's about knowing that your value doesn't come from being always right. It comes from being real, from being willing to learn, and from living with integrity. So if you recognize traces of arrogance in yourself, and we all have them, don't be ashamed. Be aware. That awareness is your invitation to change. Because every time you set your ego aside, to listen, to learn, to grow, you are stepping away from foolishness and closer to wisdom. You are not becoming smaller, you are becoming freer. Let go of the need to impress. Let go of the fear of being wrong. Embrace the humility that leads to clarity, connection, and transformation. In a world full of noise, choose to be the one who listens. 5. Talking more than listening. There is a certain kind of noise that drowns out wisdom. It's not the noise of the world, nor the chaos of life. It's the sound of our own voice speaking without pause, asserting without reflection, dominating instead of connecting. A fool talks too much. He talks not because he has something meaningful to say, but because silence is too uncomfortable. He fills every space with his opinions, his experiences, his need to be heard, and in doing so he misses the greatest opportunity life offers us, to listen, to learn, to understand. It's an ironic truth, isn't it? The more we speak without listening, the less we actually say. Words lose weight when they are unanchored by awareness. Conversation becomes noise, and over time, people stop listening to us, not because we are silent, but because we never were. The Stoics knew that the wise are not those who speak the most, but those who hear the most, who absorb, reflect, digest before responding. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the most respected philosophers of his time, said it simply, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. But the fool reverses this. He speaks twice as much as he listens, and usually with half the understanding. You've met this person, you've sat in that room, you've tried to share something real, something vulnerable, something meaningful, only to be cut off, redirected, or overshadowed by someone who wasn't really listening. They were just waiting for their turn to speak. And maybe, if we're honest, we've been that person too, because to truly listen is not easy. It requires humility, patience, presence. It means letting go of the desire to be right, to be impressive, to control the narrative. It means admitting, if only silently, that someone else might have something to teach us. And yet this is where wisdom begins. Listening is not passive. It is a radical act of attention. It is how we build trust. It is how we love. It is how we evolve. When we listen deeply, we begin to see the world as it truly is, not just as we imagine it. We begin to see others not as background noise to our own story, but as full human beings with lives, fears, hopes, and truths that matter. But the person who talks over everyone, who never pauses to ask, "What do you think?" who fills every silence with self, that person walks alone, even in a crowded room. Because people may smile, they may nod, but inwardly they are retreating. They are disconnecting. They are waiting for the moment they can leave, not because your words are wrong, but because your attention is absent. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine being the kind of person who makes others feel heard, really heard. who listens not just to respond, but to understand, who asks questions not to impress, but to explore, who creates space for others to step forward, to share, to be seen. That person holds quiet power, because when you listen well, people trust you. They open up, they grow, and so do you. Anna, a team leader at a growing company, wasn't known for being the loudest voice in the room. She didn't interrupt. She didn't compete for attention. What she did, consistently and with care, was listen. She heard every voice. She remembered what people said. She asked follow-up questions that showed she was truly present. And because of that, her team thrived, not just in productivity, but in creativity, in trust, in cohesion. Because people felt safe to speak, knowing they were not performing, they were being received. Listening is not just a personal virtue, it is a social gift. It is the seed of collaboration, of peace, of intimacy. And it is sorely lacking in a world that trains us to speak louder, faster, more often, but rarely to listen better. Now, ask yourself, do you truly listen, or are you just waiting for your turn to talk? When someone speaks, do you hear only the words, or do you listen for the meaning behind them? Do you give others the same depth of attention that you wish they would give you? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary, because talking more than listening is not just bad manners. It's a form of arrogance. It says, what I have to say is more important than what you have to share, and that is the root of disconnection from others and from truth itself. So if you wish to live wisely, begin here. Begin with the simple practice of pausing before you speak, of asking more than asserting, of listening not just with your ears, but with your full presence. The Stoic does not need to be the center of attention. He seeks not applause, but understanding. He values truth more than being right, and silence, when appropriate, more than endless speech. Because in the end, wisdom is not loud. It listens. 6. Fear of change. There is a quiet fear that binds more people than chains ever could. It is not loud, it does not scream, it whispers, it reasons, it persuades. And in doing so, it convinces us to stay where we are, even when where we are is slowly killing us. This fear is called the fear of change. It is the silent saboteur of growth. It wears many masks: prudence, tradition, responsibility, even loyalty. But underneath, it is always the same, the belief that staying the same is safer than becoming something more. But what the fool does not understand, what he refuses to understand, is that change is not the enemy. Stagnation is. You see, life is not static. It never has been. From the moment we are born, change is constant. Our bodies change, our relationships change, the world around us spins in 1,000 directions beyond our control. To resist that truth is not courage, it is delusion. And yet, many people live their lives clutching the familiar, even when it is toxic, even when it hurts, even when it no longer serves them. Because the familiar is comfortable. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't stretch the soul. It lets you pretend that tomorrow will look exactly like today, and that maybe, somehow, that's a good thing. But the Stoics saw through this lie. Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher often quoted by the Stoics, said it simply: the only constant in life is change. Marcus Aurelius took it further: what stands in the way becomes the way. And Epictetus reminded us, don't hope that events will happen as you wish. Instead, wish for them to happen as they do, and your life will flow well. This is not passive acceptance. This is radical alignment with reality. To fear change is to fight reality, and reality always wins. Now, let's be honest. Fear of change is not irrational. It's deeply human. Change demands risk. It threatens ego. It exposes weakness. It requires the death of who we were to make room for who we might become. And the ego clings to survival. even when it means staying stuck. But ask yourself, what is the cost of refusing to change? How many years have been lost staying in the wrong job, in the wrong relationship, in the wrong story about who you are, just because change felt too uncertain? How many opportunities have you let pass because the risk seemed bigger than the regret? The truth is, change is not the source of pain. Resistance is. The Stoic doesn't run from change, he moves with it. He adapts. He reflects. He chooses. Because to the Stoic, discomfort is not danger, it is the raw material of growth. Fear of change says, I don't know what will happen if I let go. Wisdom says, I don't know what will happen if I hold on. Fear says, what if I fail? Wisdom says, what if staying here is the real failure? And here lies the essential choice. Do you want to feel safe, or do you want to be free? Consider nature. A snake that refuses to shed its skin dies. A seed that never breaks open will never become a tree. A bird that will not leave the nest never learns to fly. You were not made to stay the same. You were made to evolve, to renew, to become. But you cannot become anything if you fear losing who you were. Now ask yourself, what are you holding on to that no longer serves you? What version of yourself are you protecting, even though it keeps you small? What truth are you avoiding because it would require you to change? These are not questions to fear. These are questions that set you free. Because on the other side of fear is movement. On the other side of resistance is transformation. On the other side of change is the version of you that you've been quietly craving. The one who is lighter, clearer, more courageous, more alive. You don't need to leap all at once, but you do need to take a step. One honest conversation, one small risk, one moment of saying, I'm ready. The fool clings to the past. The wise accept the present and walk toward the future with open eyes. And so I ask you now, not as a critic, but as a fellow traveler, are you living or are you clinging? Because the path of wisdom is not paved with certainty, it is built with courage, and courage always begins with the willingness to change. So now we've walked through 6 behaviors that reveal a foolish mind, not to mock, not to judge, but to reflect, to hold up a mirror, not to others, but to ourselves. A closed mind, the habit of blaming, arrogance, lack of empathy, fear of change, and the refusal to listen. Each of these isn't just a flaw, it's a wall between us and the life we are capable of living, a wall between us and the people we love, a wall between who we are and who we could become. But here's the truth the Stoics have whispered across centuries. None of these behaviors are permanent. They are not fixed parts of our identity. They are patterns. And patterns can be broken. They are habits. And habits can be replaced. We all carry traces of these traits. Wisdom begins when we stop pretending otherwise. The real fool is not the one who has these flaws, it's the one who refuses to see them, the one who builds their ego on denial and defends their ignorance with pride. But you're still here, listening, reflecting, and that means something powerful. It means you've already taken the first step toward growth, toward awareness, toward becoming the kind of person who lives with intention, with humility, with strength. Because wisdom isn't about knowing everything. It's about being willing to learn again and again. It's about trading judgment for curiosity, defensiveness for responsibility, and noise for clarity. So, ask yourself, as this video ends, where am I still resisting growth? Which of these behaviors do I still carry, quietly, in moments no one sees? And more importantly, who would I become if I chose to let them go? Thank you for sharing this time with me. If this message stirred something in you, I invite you to sit with it, reflect, write, change one small thing, And if it served you, share it, not for the sake of spreading content, but for the sake of spreading consciousness. This is not the end of the journey, only a checkpoint on the path. Until next time, live wisely, walk humbly, and always listen more than you speak.